still had to write a contract between my Art Canyon and I.
Hello everyone, welcome back. So we're still running around 8 minutes late. Try not to let it go any later than 8 minutes. Okay, so for our final panel of the day, we're going to be talking about that all-important issue, money, relevant to everybody's lives, can't really do without it. And if you're a musician, sometimes it can seem like an impossible task, earning any sort of money at all out of playing music. But there are some things that you can do to at least maximise your chances of bringing in a bit of some money if your music gets broadcast or if you're playing live gigs, festivals, that sort of thing. And there are some grant funding opportunities as well out there, which we'll talk a little bit about today, and what they are and how you can access them potentially. And a couple of other things as well that our panellists are going to be talking about money-wise. So without further ado, I will pass you over to our chair for this panel, who's Matt Booth from Music Southwest on Temple Street. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks Marie. Say welcome, but I think you've been here all day. I just want to start off really by thanking and congratulating Marie on this event, which I think is a fantastic success and a fantastic event and crucial really for musicians and people working in music in the Southwest. And I partly say that because she's doing a lot of, in a way, of what I used to do, and it's nice to be on the other side of the fence in a way, and not really part of the organisation as such, because I know what it takes to organise events like this. Just to give you a very quick bit of background on myself, I started out as a drummer, really. I moved into working in I've worked in lots of different areas of the music industry, but I was a promoter for a long time, live music promoter. I went into artist management, I worked in America, and while I was in America, I used to go, or still do go to a lot of international music conferences like South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, and I got to know people from organisations that we'll talk about over the next hour, such as the BPI, UKTI, PRS, and what they would say to me was that there wasn't particularly an organisation in the southwest of England as a conduit for them to be able to connect their membership, their organisations, etc., into the region, into the southwest. So a group of us set up an organisation in Bristol called Bristol Music Foundation, which I was director of for about 6-7 years. We closed it a couple of years ago. I now mainly work in Europe. I work on 2 European projects, which I'll talk about as we go through. And I do funding consultancy. Funding for me has always been, I have 2 things that I love. I love music and I love politics. And what I guess I've done is carve out a career that sits between the 2. In some ways, it's not fashionable for a lot of people, but what I will say is absolutely essential. And a lot of the problem that people that do have, particularly in music, is if you look at other creative industries such as film in particular, but design and crafts and things, they shy away from the idea of funding and they shy away from the what might be there and kind of addressing it. It sort of seems to be a bit dry. It's a lot to think about. There are people that are in place to help musicians, help people working in music to access funding and support their own careers and the finance of their own careers. I think that is essential. And within that, we have the trade associations who will represent you, be you as a composer, songwriter, publisher, which is PRS for music, or PPL if you're a record label, or performing artist. British Phonographic Industry, obviously, and these organisations are there for a reason. They are there for you, and you should use them. And the Bristol Music Foundation, what we did was broker those relationships. And what we're going to really try and do, I think, from today, Maria and I are speaking about, is I have a Music Southwest which we set up off the back of the BMF, Bristol Music Foundation, and we're going to start to really drive that forward now as an organisation that, again, you can become members of. We can connect you through to people such as the people on the panel today. So that's just a kind of bit of background about myself and about this session. So I'm going to start with Laura on my left. and I'm going to ask each of the panellists to introduce themselves and just say a couple of minutes, a few things about yourselves, what you do, and then we'll get into a discussion about funding.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Thank you for having me. I'm Laura. I work for PRS for Music Foundation. We're not PRS, as in the Royalty Collection Society, but we are an independent funding body that was established by PRS. So we get the bulk of our money that we give out in grant form from PRS. And we also work in partnership with lots and lots of other organisations like the Arts Council, UK Trade and Investment, Musicians Union, British Council, to deliver grants to organisations, to bands, festivals, promoters, a whole range of music companies and music makers and performers to develop their skills and to promote new music in the UK and also overseas. My role specifically is to manage the industry and export funds. So that's one fund called Momentum, which is an Arts Council England initiative, and it's £500,000 that we're giving out to artists and bands and companies working on their behalf over a 2-year period, hopefully longer if it goes well, to kind of develop their skills and to take them to sort of the next level of their careers. And another fund is the International Showcasing Fund, which really rolls off the tongue, but it kind of explains what it is. And that is a fund that we run in partnership with UK Trade and Investment and the Arts Council, and also Musicians Union and a showcasing agency called British Underground. And that supports artists and bands who have kind of started to gain some traction and increase their profile in the UK, and they want to take their first steps overseas. So that might be to showcase at something like South by Southwest in Austin, or at Womex, which kind of travels around the place. But it's very much to support bands who want to showcase at industry-facing events and conferences and stuff, rather than going on tour or playing big sort of public festivals.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris from the BPI. The BPI, basically, we are the trade association for record labels in the UK, both majors and independents. My role specifically in that is to look after all the independent labels and all the international. We run a lot of things with labels in the UK, such as training, career development days, etc., etc. We also do international things, like we organise trade missions to far-flung destinations such as LA, Japan, Australia, where we take both publishers, artists and labels out to meet their counterparts in those territories. Part of what I also do, which started in November, was I run the Music Export Growth Scheme, and that is a scheme for UK-based artists and labels to help them with international promotion and marketing. It's essentially for labels and artists that have a little bit of traction in the UK, so we see it as a sort of natural progression on from the two funds that Laura looks after. So we initially say you start off with Momentum to get a little bit of momentum in the UK. You then go for the International Showcase Fund, and then when you actually have a sort of destination in mind abroad where you've actually started to get a bit of traction, then you can look to ask for funding from Music Export Growth Scheme. It's fairly new. We've actually only just done 2 rounds. We are about to announce the next lot in about a week and a half's time. We gave away £280,000 of funding in November. We're just about to announce another £240,000. But essentially, we have £2.5 million of funding over the next 2.5 years. And obviously, you know, as Laura mentioned with their funds, we want to see these continue for many years. So we'll look to see some big successes with that.
Thanks, Chris. And another Chris Knight from UKTI.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I better explain what UK Trade and Investment are and do, I guess, before I go too much further. We're the government-funded organisation that exists to help businesses to promote themselves overseas and to become commercially successful overseas. I'm based in Exeter, and my sort of have a roving remit as far as creative industries is concerned across the southwest. And it sort of dovetails very nicely with what Laura and Chris from the BPI were talking about, in that my job is to try and connect with businesses in the region that have international potential and then will eventually feed into the showcasing programme and ideally Music Export Growth Scheme at some later date. It is businesses we're looking to support. So most of the work we do will be with record labels, management companies, but we also do work direct with artists where they obviously have business potential and have a plan, or we can help them develop a plan, but we have to justify any funding that we have, and we don't have a lot at the moment. I mean, there have been some cutbacks, as you're probably all aware, this year, but we have to be able to justify that the money and time we invest with working with businesses is likely to pay off for the taxpayer somewhere down the line. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Leo.
Hi, my name is Leo from PPL. PPL are the music licensing company that collect and distribute revenue generated through the broadcasting of sound recording. So if your tracks are played on the radio or played in pubs, clubs, bars and restaurants, then we distribute that revenue generated to both our rights holders and performer members. I actually work in our performer services team, and my main role is to help both up-and-coming performers and already established performers that are receiving high airplay register as performers, and also make sure that their repertoire is accurate so that we can distribute as much revenue as possible. I've been there for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was working as their A&R scout at an artist development company, and prior to that, I've worked in other creative industries like in TV and book publishing, and that's pretty much me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Leo. Adrian.
Hi folks, it says Adrian Scragg, ICO. ICO is one of our artists. But really I'm representing a record company and a music publisher called My Heart Canyon Music. ICO was the band that we started and formed the company around. And what we found is the most lucrative way for our artists to get an income is through the process of what they call synchronization, which is having your music put to a film, a TV, advert, or games use. It's a revenue stream that everyone is chasing right now. There's a lot of talk about synchronization, and synchronization has expanded as record sales have fallen away. We have been fortunate in that ICO, our artists, had a lot of friends in Los Angeles. When they were a previous band, Buffseeds, they had a song on Grey's Anatomy, One Tree Hill, and they were being played on a Los Angeles radio station called KCRW. Well, Buffseeds broke up without knowing that they were liked so much in LA, and ICO started up, and then it was quite a long journey of making their own records on management funding and so on, before they realized that they had these friends inside the film and TV industries in Los Angeles. We've kind of been able to tap into that, and I suppose our big breakthrough came in 2012 when we were asked to sign a license for a song called Heart of Stone to be used on the last Twilight movie. And we were really, really fortunate. They didn't just want to use it on the movie, they used it for the first advertising for the final Twilight. And they put a song which ICO had submitted onto just a little clip, the first clip that was going to be reviewed for Twilight. And they just accidentally showed a bunch of fans this clip who filmed the movie with their phones. And before we knew it, before our agent in LA knew it, 2 million views had happened. And by the time the movie came out, 40 million views on YouTube. So that's been like a good calling card for us, and we've had other things happen since. So it's been quite a steep learning curve. We are a Southwest company. We are both a label and we're a publisher. And we don't pretend that we can sell a lot of records, but we're finding ways to get into relationships with people that can actually help us get the synchronization deals. And as an example of that, this morning I've just signed a license for a TV show in Australia to use 2 of our songs. So that's kind of what we do.
Which is great news. Brilliant, thank you. And Dom?
Hi, I'm Dom Jinks. I'm the Head of Arts and Culture at the University of Exeter. So that's my day job. In a voluntary capacity, I chair a network called the Exeter Cultural Partnership, which has just developed a cultural strategy for the city that the city have just endorsed, and we're about to launch next month. I also chair a funding group in the city called the Exeter Arts Council that distribute money for small grants of up to £750 for individuals or groups. And before that, I spent about 8 years working for Arts Council England, and was working with individual artists and organisations across the country, trying to help them understand how they might be able to get their hands on some money for the exciting projects that they were running. So I think that's one of the reasons I've been asked to speak today. And importantly, I'm with the Cut Purse Rascals as well, who are playing tonight here. So come and see us.
Much more important. Good to hear. Perhaps we can use that as an example, and with Adrian sat next to you, in terms of how musicians can link into funding, and how something like yourself that works within funding might be able to access funding yourself. But we'll come back to, I just wanted to just get a show of hands in the audience so that we know that we're hopefully targeting this at what you'd like to hear and what's useful to you. Who's here in the audience? Musicians? Okay, great. Mainly musicians. Any venues? I know there's a venue down here, Sam. Labels? Promoters? Okay, so mainly musicians. Anything I've missed out there? Producers? And a musician as well, perhaps. What I'd like to do to start with, first, it's good that we have Southwest representation here, and I want to keep that within this discussion. And it's been brilliant in the earlier discussions, the amount of people from the Southwest that have been on the panels. In the earlier discussions, obviously, and certainly in the last one in terms of the Dream Team and how you actually go about really developing your artist and yourself and your profile as a musician. And obviously to do that, it requires funding, it requires money, and the traditional route may be to go out and try and get a record deal or a publishing deal, but to get another company to invest some money into what you do. As you would have heard, those models have changed a lot in the last 5-10 years. It's kind of open book now. What I have seen happen since I've worked both commercially as an artist manager and within the public sector, if you like, is, and I'm going to start here with Chris and Laura, is, and as they touched on a bit in their introductions, is the way that the trade organisations have got more involved, if you like, in a way, in putting money directly into commercial music. And that battle was going on for a long time with the Bristol Music Foundation. I was very much part of that with the trade organisations and UK Music, which is the umbrella organisation. It didn't happen traditionally. So what I'd like to try and do is just try, Chris and Laura, see if we can just unpick a little bit what we mean by funding, and get to a point where we can try and track that. Because when I started engaging with the public sector, there was the Arts Council, we were fairly removed, there was the UKTI. Now everyone seems to be working together much more effectively. Laura, maybe if I start with you. As you said, you're not PRS for Music, you're a PRS Foundation. Do you want to just come back to how that works at PRS Foundation, and maybe look at what might be relevant to people in the audience that might want to put a bid into the PRSF, and what that bid may entail, be it just for national work or for your schemes for working overseas?
Sure. So PRS for Music initiated the PRS Foundation about 14 years ago. And it was off the back of PRS was getting loads and loads of requests from specifically classical composers who were making quite niche classical music and were really, really struggling to fund that and to fund their new work and to continue being able to work as composers. So initially it was set up pretty much as a classical fund. It was there to support the commissioning and development of new classical works. And then over time, specifically, I'd say the last 4 or 5 years, I think as in response to a sector need from basically every genre of music, we've sort of branched out to help support and develop music from across all genres. And over the last few years, it's been a bit more kind of focused on contemporary popular music, which is a horrible term, but it basically encompasses everything that isn't like classical or jazz or traditional folk music, because those 3 genres of music are they're funded quite a lot through the Arts Council and through other sort of funding bodies. And so, yeah, if you wanted to apply for a grant from PRSF, as there's it's vastly musicians that are in the room, I'll try and tailor it so that it's more relevant for you. You can apply to our open funding scheme, which you either apply as a group or as an individual. And so, yeah, if you're a solo artist, go for the individuals. If you're a band, go for groups. Hopefully that's quite straightforward. And you can apply to do a tour of the UK. You could apply to develop your materials, so whether that's working with other musicians or working with new artists or producer. You can also apply for money to market yourselves, to revamp your website, or to produce sort of marketing materials that you might want to use to promote yourselves. We've also just started, sort of half secretly, we've just started to be able to fund some recording costs in that, which historically we've not been able to do before. But hopefully later this year you can apply to incorporate, if you wanted to record an EP or a single or a record, you can apply for that as well. The way that you can access our funding is it's an online application form, which is the case for all of our funding grants. If you go to our website, which is prsformusicfoundation.com, again, another kind of snappy title, you can see our whole website is pretty much dedicated to funding and how you access it in the different schemes. So if you want to apply for open funding, go to the funding section, go to open funding, and then it will give you an application form. It's a 2-stage process. So the first stage, I think we ask about 5 questions, and they aim to be really straightforward and accessible. And they're basically, tell us about your music, tell us about your background, your profile, what you've achieved already, tell us what you want funding for, which is probably the most important bit, because you need to give a really compelling and serious case as to why you want investment. We're not a bank and we're not a financial institution, but we still have to take your proposals as seriously as a bank would if you were a small business asking for a loan, just because we can't sort of throw money around at things if there's not a really clear reason for why investment is necessary at this point and how it's going to be used. And we want to be able to support people to have long-lasting and sustained careers. And so with that, you need to have a bit of business savvy on you. Otherwise, you can't make it work. So that's the reason that we really take that kind of section of why you want the funding, what you're going to do with it. It's really, really important. And we also want to know how you're going to market yourselves. So our sort of 3 main areas of interest are developing artists, developing audiences and reaching new audiences, and excellent new music, basically. So those are the 3 things that we would want you to focus on. And then once you've applied to the first stage, that's assessed externally by external experts from across the music industry, from across the country. They're not all based in London. And then if you are successful at that stage, you're taken through to stage 2. And there we just ask you for a bit more information. So we'll ask you to give us a budget, a bit more information on your marketing plans, a bit more information about what it is that you want funding for. That will then go to another panel, which meets in a room, and that kind of moves around the country. It's not just in London. And it's a similar kind of setup. So we have a range of experts in every genre imaginable, from many areas of the music industry and the arts sectors, who will kind of sit in a room, listen to your music, read your applications, and sort of fight it out as to which ones they want to support. At the moment, I think we support about 30% of applications that come into us for that scheme. So it's not a shoo-in, but it's definitely attainable. And you can apply twice in a year. So if you're not successful the first time, you can come back. And then it's a really similar process for our other programmes as well. For the International Showcasing Fund, we really need you to be at a point that you've got a profile in the UK before you're looking to export overseas. The reason for that is that it's really hard to kind of make a splash overseas if you haven't quite got an established reputation in the UK already. So we'd be looking for some national airplay, featured in national music press, have some interest from the industry. We'd expect you probably to be working with some semblance of a team, whether that's a manager or like have an indie label backing you or something. But we've also funded completely independent artists as well. And again, you just need to have a really clear case as to why you want to go to that specific showcase. If it's South by Southwest, you have to be really sort of on it in terms of who's interested in you in the States at the moment that warrants you to go over there, because it's really expensive to go over there. You have to deal with visa costs, accommodation costs, flights, all of that kind of stuff. So just make sure that you are going at it from the right angle and the right time in your career, I'd say.
Brilliant, thank you, Laura. And I think we can pick up on the international side a bit more with Chris and BPI. Chris, before I come to you, I just want to keep in mind in terms of funding for what you might want to do, and I think that be it make a record, go into a studio or something like that, and I was going to ask you, Laura, in terms of PRS Foundation funding, do you have a sort of a minimum level? Obviously, if you're looking at overseas funding, British Music Board or whatever it might be, that's going to be quite a lot higher. Mm-hmm. But is there, within your funding programs, a sort of could someone apply for 200 quid?
No, I think it starts at £1,000. I think is the sort of baseline, and then if you're applying for the first time, you can apply for up to 5k. So up to £5,000 for your first sort of application to the open funds, and then if you're successful and you've built this great sort of musical empire, you can then apply for more money next time. Mm-hmm. Up to, I think 25k was our biggest grant, mm-hmm. but tends to be quite rare actually. But, yeah.
Thank you. The Music Export Growth Fund.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, essentially, it was launched in November. We have £2.5 million to give away over 2.5 years. And essentially, it's a matched funding scheme. So we would be able to fund up to 70% of an overseas action. And obviously, we differentiate ourselves from the PRS Foundation funding in that we don't allow for showcases that are named in in International Music Showcase Fund. We're not really for anything in the UK. So, as Laura was saying earlier, about having a little bit of attraction in the UK, we're also looking for that. But we obviously see ourselves as once you've done Momentum, once you've done the International Showcase, you've been out to something like Eurosonic or South by Southwest or Jazz Ahead or Classical Next or etc., 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 then you've got that little bit of interest overseas. The funding that you can apply for from us helps you get to that next level. So it can help you do things like having marketing and promotion teams out in an overseas territory. It can help you with tour support. We can help with hiring a tour manager. We can actually help with getting you out there in the first place. And we have 4 funding rounds a year. We've actually just completed one on Monday. We had our board meeting. And in much the same way with the PRS Foundation, we have a form that's online, but actually ours is downloadable when our website's not quite as flash as theirs. And essentially what we're looking for is a business case. We have a responsibility to oversee, a government fund, so i.e. taxpayers' money. and we have to show UK trade and investment that we're not just giving it to the first 5 people who turn up. You know, we're giving it to businesses. Now, what do I mean by a business? I can mean you as an individual artist. I mean your manager, your label, your promotions company, absolutely anything as long as they're a UK-based company and you're not a major label. So in essence, you have to be a small to medium enterprise, which about 99.9% of record labels in the UK are. The 3 majors aren't, and actually one of them is very close to being an SME anyway. You know, we're looking at, you know, funding artists that have reached the level in the UK. But what does that mean? I mean, that can mean anything from sales, you know, is an obvious one, but when we don't differentiate by genre, so you can apply if you're classical, if you're jazz, if you're... I think we had an application this last round that was described themselves as medieval. I'm not quite sure what that was, but, you know, they actually put a case forward to go and play at a festival, and actually it was a showcase fund, so we've actually referred them over to Laura's team. You know, we are looking essentially to back artists, projects that will see a return back to the UK. So we're looking for sound investment, and as Laura mentioned earlier, it is quite a complicated process. You know, you filling a form, you then put applications through to myself. I sit there with the UKTI music specialist Phil Patterson, and we go through them with a fine-tooth comb, look at, you know, things like the success in the UK, but we judge that on lots of things. We look at sales, but we look at, you know, how many social media stats you have, you know, who's playing your records, if it's been played on radio, if you had any synchronization deals, you know, have you played venues, you know, if you're playing venues, you know, what size are you playing? And as you say, we sort of weight that considerably. If you're a frontline pop act, we expect you to be selling quite a lot of records playing big venues. If you're, you know, a small independent sort of indie artist, we'll judge that accordingly. So there isn't a sort of set criteria. Essentially, what we're looking for is potential in it. I mean, just to give you an idea of some of the artists that we funded in the first round, 2 of the biggest ones were probably Public Service Broadcasting and Drenge. Now, Public Service Broadcasting are actually signed to their own label. It's run by their manager and the artists themselves. Drenge are actually signed to Infectious, which is quite a big independent label. And they put forward a really compelling case to do tours, both in the USA, but they'd got a plan together where they'd already been out to South by Southwest, they'd been out to Eurosonic, they'd had, you know, funding from other bodies, but then they'd given us this thing of, well, we've got a lot of interest in the USA, we've you know, seen that there's a team out there, here's a little tour that we want to do. With this tour, it's going to help us get, you know, bigger promotion, bigger marketing out there, sign a bigger record deal, and get some sync stuff. And both of them applied for and got, I think one was £50,000, one was £20,000. It is matched funding, so obviously, you know, one of the entities had to put the 30% in there. Luckily, both could do that. But, you know, we actually are looking for, you know, artists that are at a certain tipping point level. So, you know, if you're a new artist and you maybe haven't even, you know, toured the UK, we're probably not for you. You know, we'd advise you to look at Momentum. The round 2 that we've just completed, we've had quite a lot of artists who applied in the first round in November. We gave them some feedback. They've actually come back with better applications and got funding. One of them actually didn't get funding in November, was a bit annoyed, rang me up, chewed my ear off down the phone, came back with another application, and on the application was the album you said that wasn't going to do anything actually went top 10, you know, fuck you, well, we want money. And we went, yep, correct, we got it wrong, there you go, have some money. So, you know, it's just to show you that, you know, initially if you're rejected on these things, you know, it's to come back with a more compelling case. And I don't think I've seen a better example of that than what's just happened. But and, you know, we're obviously looking at doing 4 rounds this year. We've got another one that opens on the 12th of May, finishes on the 16th of June. The information is all on the BPI's website, which is very simple. It's bpi.co.uk. It's quite an interesting website. And you can obviously look on that and see lots of other things we do. But the Export Fund is on the front page there. It gives you an idea. But it also gives you bios of the first 14 acts that we that we funded, so it'll give you an idea of, you know, the kind of artists we're looking at. They were very wide-ranging in genres. The next lot we're about to reveal in about a week's time are just as diverse, but the one thing, as I say, they've got to go with them is they've got that little spark of potential that they were able to put across in our application. And, you know, in our board meeting, which was about 14 people, they went through about 50 applications, and that board is made up of representatives both from industry trade associations, but also from management companies, artists themselves, managers, radio promotions guys, pluggers, you know, guys who are international tour managers, guys who've been head of international at labels. So it's quite a diverse bunch. So, you know, you are going into a pretty ruthless arena where people can look at your marketing plan, look at your, you know, the application form you put through, and these guys will find, if there's any fault with it, they will find it. You know, so it's a case of we're looking at applications, you know, and we want to put through as many applications to that board as possible. And obviously, as we've now done 2 rounds, we're going to, you know, we've given a little bit more feedback on this round. We'll look to come and speak at events like this where, you know, maybe some of you might have applied last time, you know, didn't actually get funding. You can actually think, oh, well, you know, I was applying for X, Y, and Z. I now know to apply for A, B, and C. Hopefully, you know, some of the people in this room will apply at some stage for it, and hopefully will be successful. And with current for any funding applications is you've got that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes in a meeting where you've got to put across on paper the passion that you as musicians, as artists, as labels have got for, you know, for your career. You have to somehow transfer that onto paper, and the ones that do it, you know, will be successful and get funding.
And Chris, I would imagine you would support that in terms of people that come to you for funding at UKTR?
Yes, absolutely. We're looking at people that usually will have a track record in the UK, probably not quite at the level that the BPI are looking for, because our job is to try and help people develop to the point that they become candidates for the Music Export Growth Scheme. But it does, you know, you do have to look like you have potential. You have to have demonstrated that, you know, you have a plan, you have an organisation, you've done, you know, you've achieved a certain amount in the UK, and that actually there is potential for you to do something overseas, and we will then try and, well, firstly help you understand whether there is potential overseas, because we have, as well as the people we have working with artists direct in the UK, we have teams overseas who are based in most British embassies and consulates. So as well as having diplomatic teams, they have commercial teams, and their job is to try and get UK companies to be successful in the countries they're based in. So, you know, we can help artists understand whether there is a market for what they're doing in a particular country. So, you know, part of our job will be, you know, is there justification? Are you right in thinking that you have potential to tour in Japan or Germany or the USA? How are you going to do it? What's it likely to cost? We have some funding to help people do that. We have funding to help you do market research. So the critical thing from our point of view is we want to stop you making mistakes. We don't want you launching into some project that involves your money and ours and that doesn't stand a hope in hell of working. So our first job, as we see it, is to really understand where your potential is. And we can bring a bit of funding. We have a program called Passport to Export, which is a development program. It's a training program. It helps usually management companies, maybe labels, but we have worked with performers on it where they've been able to demonstrate to us that they look like a business. We can bring some funding to help them understand what markets are right and how to get there. At a much more simpler level, we have funding just simply as a travel grant, and what we've done with several artists who, for example, have seen an opportunity to tour in Ireland, for example. They've established a touring circuit in the UK. They've had interest from Ireland. You know, we can do something as simple as, okay, you're not going to make any money out of it first time round. We can give you some money just to help you defray some of the costs and to see whether that's something you ought to be doing, and next time round perhaps you'll make some money. We look at everything on a case-by-case basis, so it's really difficult to say yes or no until we've sort of delved a bit into what you look like as a potential business. But we will talk to anyone who thinks they have overseas potential and help them understand whether they're right or wrong.
Thanks, Chris. It's brilliant. I mean, that gives you an idea of what's happening on a national and international level. And picking up on something from the last panel that was discussed was with festival bookers were saying, John from Somerset and Eden was saying that he'll watch an artist sort of grow from being worth, say, £100, £50 up to 1,000, up to maybe 10,000. And in a way, what we're looking at here, and Chris is, for those of you who don't know, is based in Exeter, and he's our Southwest UKTI specialist for creative industries. And there are conduits, really, and getting up to what Chris Towns is talking about with these bigger pots of money, there are different ways to get up to that. And Dom, if I could bring you in to really kind of come into a local level in Exeter, perhaps you could just talk a bit about the cultural strategy for Exeter and the cultural partnership here, and also Exeter Arts Council you mentioned, because where that's, so I think really that's the kind of little pots of money that can be really useful to people. To get them started off.
Well, the cultural strategy which has just been developed for the city is very much looking at how the city can develop its cultural offer. There's been quite a few people talking throughout the day about how the city is quite a vibrant city, and how you're seeing sort of music and other art forms, theatre, dance, as a sort of commonplace occurrence here in the city. And the City Council have said that culture is one of their top 3 priorities for the city. So they haven't cut any of their money for the arts, again, which is, again, fantastic news and quite unprecedented nationally. You have some local authorities, such as Somerset, who have sort of put a knife through the arts completely. But the City Council have, I think, really are beginning to understand that culture has a serious role to play in the offer of the city. And I think one thing we've been saying in terms of the cultural partnership is you need to give people another reason to come into the city other than shopping. And especially with the growth of online shopping, fewer people are coming into the city to shop. Exeter's doing reasonably well still to draw in those people from the region to shop. But what we've been saying from a cultural perspective is that it really should be for those reasons connected to culture that can bring in other people to the city. Exeter has quite a poor record for overnight visitors, has a very poor record for weekend visitors as well. So again, what we've been saying to the City Council is if there is investment in culture, that can actually begin to drive the cultural economy of the city. And a fantastic example of that is the RAM in town, and how actually what we've begun to see is how places such as coffee shops have begun to see a real spike through people coming into the city, going to the museum, and actually beginning to stop more in those places. So culture is beginning to grow and contribute to the economy of the city. The Exeter Arts Council, if I just say a few words on this, is a small funding body that has a range of people that sit on that group who are representative of cultural organisations from across the city. Now, annually, that has a pot of £10,000 to distribute in grants of up to £750. And that can be from a range of activities such as a festival of music at the Double Locks, which we've just recently given money to a small idea for setting up of ukulele festivals, ukulele workshops across schools and colleges across Exeter and the southwest. So it can fund a range of things. It can fund individuals. It can fund organisations, it can fund consortiums. And again, what I would say is try and be as developmental as possible, rather than just saying, I want you to fund my band. I think it's very unlikely that you would get the money. Whereas if it is trying to do something that might engage a broad range of people and have really good public engagement at the heart of it, and also pretty good arts as well, so pretty good music, again, I think it is something that we could look to fund. I think just to touch on the Arts Council as well, it's sort of a misconception that there's no money around. The Arts Council basically funds in two ways. It funds through Treasury money and it funds through lottery money. Now, at the moment with the Tory government or coalition government, Treasury money is reducing, and that money funds core organisations such as the Exeter Phoenix. That money is decreasing. But interestingly, they have lottery money as well. Now, in times of recession, more people play the lottery. And also that money has come back into the lottery from the Olympics. So lottery money is doing pretty well at the moment. And the scheme that generally is funded by the Arts Council through lottery money is called Grants for the Arts, which is a rolling scheme and can fund anything from £1,000 up to £100,000. And again, individuals can apply, organisations can apply, so it's definitely worth looking at. And one thing we've been told by the Arts Council through the Exeter Cultural Partnership is they would like to see more applications from Exeter-based individuals and organisations. Because again, if you look at Bristol, the money that the Arts Council would spend on the arts from both core organisations and through Grants for the Arts, I think it equates to £17.60 a head of population. At the moment in Exeter, it's £8.60 a head. So they have been saying, please encourage people to apply to Grants for the Arts. So just thought I'd mention that.
No, it's really good, thank you. And it's really useful because I think Grants for the Arts is, and always has been, a pot of money that you can go to, and there are offices for the Arts Council in the South West who you can go and see. And just to finish off on that, Dom, you're obviously involved in a lot to do with culture in Exeter, which is brilliant, and obviously there is a drive for culture in Exeter, and I'm just wondering for people here if they wanted to connect with some of the things that you talked about, how do they do that?
Okay, well there's an event that is happening on the 9th of May at RAM. It's a free event, and it's 10 till 12:30, and that is to launch the cultural strategy for the city. And there is a keynote speaker called Charles Landry who has helped reshape such cities as Barcelona, Berlin, Helsinki, working on cities such as Adelaide at the moment, who's coming down to talk about the importance of culture. So that's a perfect event to connect with in terms of the cultural strategy for the city and the Exeter Cultural Partnership. And again, just a great networking opportunity. I think in terms of Exeter Arts Council, if you would like to find out a bit more about how you might apply to that, go to the website for Exeter City Council and type in Exeter Arts Council, and there you will find out the terms and conditions there. But the next round of funding will be for June. So again, applications of up to 750. And if you want to, just talk to me afterwards, and I'm very, very happy to, be here, and we'll be here for the evening as well.
Fantastic. And go and see his band later, I think that's what he's saying.
Absolutely.
Grab him after that. I think just kind of, I'm going to chuck in a couple of things here, and I want to bring Adrian in just to come back across the panel because of Adrian's with publishing hat on, almost literally, and Sync, and in terms of where you may have applied for funding to anybody this side of the panel, and just a couple of things that I work on here, and you in the Southwest. Which is part of the national, Chris Tam spoke about the trade organisations and the Music Development Agency. So we have Bristol Music Foundation, we're looking at growing Music Southwest. Mapped Out is a project which is funded by the Arts Council as part of their strategic touring fund, and that is to support promoters predominantly and venues. So we're picking up with 2 new people in Exeter now. We work in Plymouth, but also artists as well. It works on a national basis, so we work with booking agents, and it's a network of venues nationally. We work with those booking agents to select artists that will do a national tour, and then we will work with artists that will support those artists in the region on the Mapped Out tours. So that's just something I wanted to chip in on that. And Adrian, can I just get you to talk about Sync and the development ICO is about, but also My Hot Canyon in terms of, obviously you've done a lot and had a lot of success with synchronisation as a funding, as a finance stream really, but how that may, because everyone's spoken about match funding, and I think in terms of the importance of getting your business plan together and the importance of presenting yourself well for funding, one thing it's kind of tools really and knowledge, and one of the main things that I deal with helping people with funding is match funding and understanding what that means and where you need to have match. Just basically looks at where you're investing yourself, if you like, into something to make them want to invest also. So
I think the main thing really is to be a good learner. I think in all of this, the whole music industry is sort of just morphing into something different all the time. And we, working with musicians I've worked with, they were at one point signed to a London label, toured the UK, toured Europe, played in New York, and so on. So we've seen a kind of change in the industry models, and what we're trying to do is, along with many others, is adapt to the new world where it's very hard to sell records, even at the highest level of the most popular artists. And things like, I don't want to go into too much, but Spotify streaming and those sorts of issues, they seem to be on one level very good, but on another level, if you were to look into how many Spotify streams you need in order to make, a £10 ticket to go and see a band. I think, what did we have? We had 300,000 Spotify streams, and I think it was about £11. So some of the things that are happening in the, if you like, the new music industry isn't necessarily helping to generate the funding streams that most people need to live on. And so this is why even people like, there are people like the lead singer of Snow Patrol, I've forgotten what he's called, moved to LA, isn't making a record, but is actually writing and trying to get synchronization deals. And there is this whole shift. From our point of view, we're very grateful for probably all the organisations around here, because in various ways we work with them. I mean, UKTI especially, and BPI, we went to Los Angeles on a trip called a Sync mission to Los Angeles, where there were 50 UK companies meeting 40 LA-based music professionals, people from film, TV worlds, and so on. And Chris Towns was on that trip, and Chris Knight helped me get the match funding for us to go. So that's kind of a little bit of how it works. And what we're now trying to do is we're trying to keep that process going. In the spring, we've been out to Eurosonic. 2 of us from the company went to Eurosonic. I've just come back yesterday from Paris to a Sync event. And essentially, if you're trying to get into that world, you've got to learn exactly how publishing companies work. You've got to learn exactly how to be chasing down all the registrations or the income streams. It's an immensely complicated world, so you have to go and do the training from an organisation like the PRS in London. On top of that, you've got to be probably... Somebody said, actually, on the Paris Sync Summit, don't be delusional. Don't be delusional. If your mum thinks that you're as good as Muse, or better, and your best mate from school thinks you're the next best thing since the Beatles, they're probably wrong. You have to have people with the ability to curate the music, the ability to kind of understand whether you're good enough to make it in those sorts of worlds. So it's an immensely difficult world to put your music into. And it's very funny. We're now in the position where major companies are sending us briefs for their projects so that our writers can work on those projects. And very often they will say, well, I don't really know what I'm looking for here. It's kind of a bit like this trailer, and we think it's sort of 80s disco sound, so whatever. or we want some old synths here and a kind of oriental sound. So you get these kind of vaguenesses that come your way. And maybe later on, when you see the music that they actually chose, it's none of those things. Because really, they're like many other people in the arts. They'll kind of say to you, honestly, we'll know that it's right when we hear it, you know. So it's a you have to be immensely tough-minded. You have to wade past rejection, much as you do if you're a live artist. But you probably your music needs not to demand too much, so it overpowers the narrative of the movie or the TV. It needs to perhaps get across emotional moods. It needs to perhaps be able to be put underneath the film and almost creep up on you and mug you. So there are maybe not that many artists that can do that. You know, maybe if you are a kind of metal band, your way of mugging is slightly different from that. Yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question.
That'll do. No, it's good. Thank you. Leo, coming on to you with PPL, and I'm aware of, I don't know how much time we've got, but
we've gone over, but we did start a little bit late, so if we just let Leo speak, and then maybe a couple
and then
of
we'll
questions.
take a few questions. And on membership, basically, and again, so we're looking at money, we're looking at finance, we're looking at funding, and in terms of PPL and membership, and I think one of the things that I've come across is people do not sign up to PPL, or they're a bit confused about what it is, and then they realise the kind of royalties that they're missing out on. And
okay, well, our revenue actually can be very what's the correct word? Valuable to new and upcoming artists, especially for bands and performers that are applying for both Laura's and Chris's funds. It kind of helps put your case together. So we distribute for recordings that are broadcasted, like on the radio. So we both pay out to record companies and rights holders. So like a dude who's in his bedroom creating like his own records on his like his MacBook, he kind of like falls under like a rights holder or like a record label, and both performers. So the contracted members, so the band themselves, and also session guys and producers like yourself. So when your recordings have been broadcasted on the radio, both, like I said, both the performers and the rights holders are eligible for revenue from us, and that revenue is actually split in different ways. So, for instance, say you've had a track which has been broadcasted on 6 Music, and it's been allocated like £100 by us. That £100 is then divided up into a number of ways. 50% of that automatically goes to the rights holder, so the dude in his bedroom, and then the other 50% is divided up with those performers on the records. So you've got 65% of that, 50% is for the band themselves, and then the other 35% is for the session guys or the producer who's done some programming on the recordings. He's entitled to a portion of that 35%. But if there's no other session guys on it, then a band will actually get that whole 50%. So in theory, the dude in his bedroom who's made the recording and performed in the recording, he could be receiving, well, he would be receiving 2 types of revenue, both the rights holder revenue and the performer revenue. So when it comes to membership, he would have to become a performer member and a rights holder member. So that's 2 application forms. It's quite simple. Both application forms only take about minutes to complete, and they're both free. All you have to do is go to www.ppluk.com and just click on the top right where it says My PPL, and from there you can create both your performer and rights holder account. When you're creating like a rights holder account, you can also be allocated an ISRC code, which is then embedded into your sound recording. So once you've actually created like a rights holder account, it's the rights holder's responsibility, so the dude in his bedroom, to register those recordings so that when Six Music are playing his recordings, that can be tracked, and then we can actually allocate revenue to those recordings. Then, as a rights holder, he doesn't have to link. Well, I say link. It's kind of called a performer claim. So the performer would then have to claim onto that recording saying, look, I played on this recording. So there's kind of like a misconception with labels and performers, where performers kind of say, oh, I thought my record label already linked me to this recording or made a claim on this recording for me. Nine times out of 10, it's no. It's the performer's responsibility to actually become a PPL member and then make those claims onto those recordings so that we can actually pay out a revenue to the performer. And that's pretty much that for UK revenue. Like bands like Drench and Public Service Broadcasting. Yeah, that's the one. Our revenue, which we actually pay out to them, will probably actually become quite vital in the next 12 months. So it could help those guys actually, pay their rent, and which most likely it will do. But PPL also collect like international revenue as well. So from countries like Germany and France, we do the whole neighbouring rights collection, which has been a pretty big buzzword at the moment. Over the past 2 years, you've got like a lot of companies pop out claiming that they actually collect neighbouring rights. Mostly publishers nowadays, because it seems like a pretty cool income stream, like extra income stream. But people actually do that for a large number of our performers and rights holders. It looks like you have some questions.
Sorry, yeah, I had one just next to me. Thank you.
Thanks. Do they backdate?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something.
How far do they backdate?
Cool. Excellent question. So, in order to backdate on a performer side, the recording has to be first. The recording has to be in our database. So, say for instance, a Universal registered a recording, and the recording came out 5 years ago, and the performer who was on that recording registered today. That performer could claim back those 5 years. But if that recording came out 5 years ago, but the label did only registered it today, we then couldn't backdate that far. We could only backdate for that calendar year of the recording being registered, if that makes sense. So as soon as you've actually recorded your recordings, it's best to actually register those recordings straight away.
Right.
Does that make sense?
So if you release something but you don't register it, and then it gets played, and then you register it after it's been played, it can't get backdated.
You'll have to register it in that calendar year. So say for instance, you release something.
I released something in October 2013.
Yeah.
And it got played last week.
Yeah.
but I haven't registered it yet.
Yeah.
This is true story, by the way.
I don't get any money for it.
That's bang on.
Warning you.
So what you could have actually done, I know it's a bit too late now, but if you actually registered that recording in December last year, that would have been okay. So the best thing to do is to register those recordings in that calendar year of release, so that we can actually allocate that revenue to you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
We're pretty much out of time, but maybe just squeeze.
Any other questions?
If there are any.
Yep, there's one here.
Yeah, like I record my own stuff at home, and now and again I record other artists. I'm just wondering what the likelihood it would be of getting funding for like higher end equipment for a recording studio.
Who would like that?
I can answer that from my perspective.
Yes.
Anyway. Hello. From our perspective at the foundation, I should have probably said this. We don't tend to cover what's seen as capital costs, which is equipment, or sometimes people apply for funding for like a van or a recording studio in their garden. And a lot of funders don't cover that, annoyingly. There's loads of like lengthy reasons as to why it's not. They don't cover them. I'm not going to go into that because we don't have very much time and it's really boring. But yeah, unfortunately, out and out equipment costs we can't cover. But if it's part of a bigger project, you can kind of apply for some of those costs in that context of, say, making an album for a specific artist, whether that's you or someone you're working with.
Like if you're encouraging like the community artists to get involved and like have a place to record. Like,
Yeah.
Would that help the?
Yeah, I mean, the Arts Council would probably be a bit more open to that.
Yeah,
I would say, yeah.
No, I mean, capital costs, as Laura says, is really difficult.
It's best just build the studio yourself.
It's it's one thing that's really worth thinking about with looking at funding and taking up your point is partnership. Is working in partnership. I sit on the board of the Devon Music Education Hub, and every year we've just assigned money to ensembles, which are just music groups that work with young people in music. So that could be an example there. We funded 23 organisations, and the average money is about £4,000 or £5,000. None of that would be capital, but if say 4 organisations had got together and said we wanted to invest into a studio, which some of that is going to be buying some equipment, and it's a case in point, I think, here in terms of who selects the money, who makes the decisions if you're applying for funding, which is something I think people always should know about. But that could well be considered, for example, in the hub board, but it becomes depreciable, so you maybe have to pay that back. There is flexibility, certainly with smaller local kind of funding, but you need to kind of talk to them direct. But capital funding is really difficult. It's more kind of private investment, that one, I think. But
Anyone else who will be close? Just one more.
Hi. Over a period of years, I've signed various contracts and not signed some of them. I've noticed a phrase has cropped in over the last few years regarding moral rights, and you're often asked to waive your moral rights, and that even includes uploading music either to, I think it's BBC 6 or probably BBC Introducing, I know they're both connected. I just wondered if there's any, can you briefly explain, perhaps anybody, what that exactly means? Does it affect the potential for the music to earn money?
Depends what context you use it.
Yeah, I've heard those rights. Well, people trying to slip in these type of clauses into session work. I've mostly heard it from US session guys where people have tried to get them to waive their PPL rights, which you actually can't do. So that's the only time I've ever heard it being slipped into a contract, or that there's any more. Yeah, if that helps at all.
My vague understanding of it was that it was a kind of a term to encompass all of the various rights that you have in your music. I was kind of surprised to see it in the BBC small print.
There's obviously some things, you know, as Leah's just said, you know, things like mechanical payments go to songwriters, and you can't waive that because, you know, it goes to songwriters. You know, it's the law. That's what happens. I don't, you know, maybe we should have a chat afterwards to find out exactly what area it's in, but essentially on anything where anyone's asking you to waive rights, you know, the easy thing is to, you know, well, the first thing you should be doing is A, asking them why they want you to do this, and B is, you know, to look at it, you know, to get some advice from, you know, either, you know, a local citizen advice bureau or even, you know, if you're signed to a label or anything like that, is just understand why they're doing it. I mean, there was a lot of phrases used around the Olympics, and we obviously represented some of the artists that were playing at the opening ceremonies where they waived moral rights. And, you know, lawyers run the music industry. They always have done. They always will do. They all spent hours and hours sitting with each other talking about moral rights, when essentially all it was that there wasn't a fund in the Olympic to actually give anyone any performance fees. But then they waived moral rights, which was quite an easy thing to do, and they ended up getting paid £1 each. So they didn't waive their moral rights; they actually got £1 for them. So it does depend, you know, obviously which sort of circumstance it's used in. But my advice on anything to do with that is just seek advice from somebody. Citizens Advice Bureau, a fantastic organisation. You know, if you're a member of a trade association, you know, PPL and, you know, and PRS, if you're members, you know, have certain facilities where you can ask information from them. If you're a BPI member or an AIM member, we have a legal team that you have access to, and that's the kind of thing that they can help with. But, you know, Google's a good friend. It's one of the things Google does do, right? Does a lot wrong, but, you know, for information like that, it can be quite useful for you.
And to add to what Chris just said, the Musicians Union as well. I think.
I forgot them. Sorry.
But yeah, they've got access to legal stuff.
I'm not a lawyer, but I do have to write contracts sometimes, and I think moral rights is to do with your right to be recognised as the composer or the author of that work. Ordinarily, I see it in contracts which say this doesn't affect your moral rights. So I would always be careful about signing anything that asks you to waive any rights.
Yeah, that's my eyebrow.
Yeah. Anything that asks you to waive anything, instantly be suspicious of.
Get a lawyer.
Okay, thank you.
Gosh, that's amazing.
Before we run out of time, but I'm really sorry if we let this go on and on, but we've got lots of great bands in here this evening. They need to get in and sound check really soon, so we need to do away with all the chairs. But thank you so much, Matt, for chairing the panel, and for all of the panellists. Thank you very, very much for taking part today.
Cheers.
And thank you all for coming along and making it what it has been.